Okay, so I think we're going to start. Just going to do the introduction. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick reminder to please stay muted, and welcome back to the CCMAR seminars, and thank you for attending. Today we have Rodrigo Oyanedel, who is doing his PhD at the University of Oxford, and he'll be telling us about the lack of compliance in wildlife trade regarding fishers and traders in a small-scale fishery in Chile. Thank you for joining us, and go ahead.
Great, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to have the opportunity to talk to you. I wish I was there and not in the cold Oxford. So today I'm gonna present you different little pieces from my PhD, which was supervised. Well, it is. I haven't finished yet. Supervised by Stefan Gersic from the Universidad Católica de Chile and E.J. Milner-Gulan from the University of Oxford and the Interdisciplinary Center for Conservation Science. So it's entitled "Tackling Small-Scale Fisheries Non-Compliance." And please feel free to just interrupt me if you have any questions. I'm gonna try to cover lots in the presentation. So if I'm going too fast or there's something you didn't quite get, please just stop me. Okay, so I have a long-standing interest in fisheries, and especially small-scale fisheries. I think some of the most sort of obvious reason is that they provide a source of livelihood for over 50 million people around the world, especially in small-scale fisheries and developing countries, but also they provide with the main source of protein for more than 1 billion people. But I guess that those are the most obvious reason. But I've been lucky enough to travel along the coast of Chile and Peru and a little bit through the islands of the Philippines, and what I really like about small-scale fisheries is the diversity in the culture and the ways these communities live. And I think there's a cultural heritage there that is quite important. But unfortunately, small-scale fisheries are quite threatened today for many reasons. And one of those reasons is non-compliance with regulations. So non-compliance is quite widespread in the world and can happen because of many reasons. It could be people fishing with the wrong gear. For instance, in the Philippines, sometimes they use dynamite and they blow up the reefs and then collect the fish. They could be fishing in areas where they are not allowed to fish or in the wrong time of the year. There's many reasons, and obviously the consequences of those actions are going to depend quite closely depending on the type of non-compliance. And this issue of non-compliance is especially important in small-scale fisheries because of two reasons. The first one is that these fishing communities depend very heavily on natural resources and fish. So when non-compliance starts affecting those ecosystems, these people suffer the most. And the second reason is that usually in small-scale fisheries, the capacities and the budget for enforcement are lower in existence. So you don't have a lot of mechanism to use enforcement to make people or incentivize people to comply. And obviously non-compliance is much broader than fisheries, and there's a lot of research trying to look at what are the underlying factors that drive people to follow rules or not, and of course in this case fisheries behaviors. But there's also markets, and I think markets are quite important in trying to understand how wildlife trade and fisheries operate. And so I'm going to touch basically on these points mostly along the presentation. So let me start first with what motivates non-compliance. There are obviously several reasons why people might comply or not, but there is one categorization that I really like, that I describe in more detail in one of our papers, which is the references below. Obviously, I can share all of this. And in this framework, the motivation for compliance are divided in three main categories. So one is normative, that have to do with social and personal norms. This is You know, if you feel that everyone will sort of think bad of you because of not complying a rule, that's sort of your motivation that's an example of normative motivation to follow a rule. Then you have legitimacy-based motivation that have to do with how people perceive rules and those that enact those rules. So basically, if the government enacts a rule that is very unfair or is very that doesn't make any sense, you are much less likely to comply with that rule. And finally, another type of motivation is sort of the classical instrumental model in which individuals calculate the cost and benefits of complying. Here, the costs relate to the possibility of getting enforced and the size of the fine if detected. On the other side, markets are quite sort of messy and unstructured system. I use this definition here because I think it encompasses what markets are. So I describe it as the combination of institution, processes, infrastructure, and social relations where parties engage in exchange. And markets not necessarily lead to non-compliance, but in many cases, there's quite good evidence that is markets that are incentivizing uses of different products of wildlife. It could be fish, it could be bushmeat, but in many cases, there's evidence that markets drive people to not comply with rules. And so I think that combining the understanding of why individuals might follow or not follow rules with an understanding of markets can help better understand ways to reduce non-compliance and incentivize people to comply more. Markets, however, are just sort of, are, as I said before, are very complex and messy and involve lots of pieces. So actually, fisheries, the act of fishing itself and pulling the fish out of the ocean is only the first step. Then you have processing, you have transfer, you have transactions, you have consumers, you have end vendors, you have lots of things that can influence in different ways what ultimately this fisher does. And so one thing that we I guess started thinking with my PhD was, how can we evaluate these markets? How can we understand the ways in which these markets might incentivize or disincentivize non-compliance in fisheries and wildlife trade in general? So we, in one of my chapters, we provided this framework, which is basically a framework that helps describe and understand markets and at the same time try to understand which intervention might be more useful for reducing non-compliance. So in this framework, we divide the users or the participants of markets into 4 groups: harvesters, which in the ocean is fisheries. Then you have intermediaries or traders, you have vendors and consumers. And we also provide in this framework a way to analyze markets divided in 3 analytical levels. So one is the actor that looks at sort of the individual or the group of individuals. Then there is the interactor, which looks at how individuals interact. And then you have sort of the broader scale market analysis level. I'm not going to get into too much detail in the whole of the framework right now, but I'm going to focus mostly on the harvester and intermediary level, but I'm happy to discuss more about this framework or provide the reference. So all that I've been talking about is quite theoretical, I guess. So I want to now bring it back to earth, or back to the ocean in this case, with a case study in which I spent lots of time in my thesis in this place, and it's the small scale fishery in Chile, and I chose this fishery because of 2 main reasons. The first one was it's a key fishery for Chile. Not only it provides livelihood for more than 10,000 people, but it's the most common fish in Chile and it's the cheapest. So it's what most people in Chile would eat if they eat something from the ocean. And that's one reason. It's a key fishery. It's not just another fishery. And the other reason is that there are high levels of non-compliance detected in this fishery for years now, actually, especially with the quota. So basically the fishers in this fishery have the small scale fisheries have a quota to the boat. And what's been happening in the last 10 years or so is that they go over the quota. They fish much more than what they are allowed. And we knew before starting my PhD that there was this issue with the quota, but we also wanted to understand what happens with other rules. So in this fishery, there are 3 other rules, main rules: a reproductive ban, fishing gear, and which I think is super interesting, is this local 3-day rule. And this is a rule that was developed exclusively by fishers. Like, the government has nothing to do here. It doesn't enforce or anything. It was just created by the fishers for the fishers. And as I'm gonna show you, it's a rule that people actually comply with quite much. So let me jump into some of the methods. So basically what we do, we focus on a specific region of Chile, the 7th region, which is in red in the map of the long country of Chile. And we assess a few things. We first measure the level of non-compliance with these 4 rules that I just presented, using specialized techniques for assessing sensitive behaviors. And then we assess what motivated fishers to comply or not with these rules. And finally, we use key informant interviews to understand the role of the markets and traders or intermediaries in this fishery, and to build the model that I'm going to show you in a few slides. So let me jump into some results. So the first here, that this is from a paper we published last year. It's the motivations for compliance. So first, let me show you the level of compliance. So at the top, you see that fishers basically not comply with the quota limit. We knew this already. Basically, no one is complying with this rule. But interestingly, the same group of fishers comply really well with the other rules. So it's not a group of fishers who don't care about the rules. It's actually fishers who don't comply with one rule, but do comply very highly with the other rules. And this was very surprising to us, because we thought we were coming into a system where no one really cared about the rules, and we found that they actually care very much for most of the rules. And so we wanted to understand why. And what we found is that instrumental motivations didn't explain why people would comply with some rules but not others. Normative motivation helped explain a little bit, but it was actually legitimacy-based motivation that were quite different for the quota in comparison to the other ones. So this is basically because fishers thought that the quota regulation was quite unfair, and so they didn't have a lot of sort of motivations to comply with that regulation specifically in compared to the other ones. So that started to give us a few lights into why we saw this heterogeneity in the responses from fishers. Now, as I was telling you, fishers are just one piece of the supply chain, and sorry I couldn't find a better picture to reflect this, but here you see all the boats, and I don't know if you can see my pointer, but here you see a few trucks here and there, and these trucks are the traders or the intermediaries, which are the ones who buy the fish from the fishers and then take it to the market. And so something that we also wanted to do in my thesis was to focus on this group as well and try to understand how their incentives and their operation actually affected the levels of compliance in the fishery. And because usually when you're studying non-compliance and illegal behaviors, it's quite hard to get to talk with some of the people that are involved in that. In this case, we created a model. We couldn't get to talk much with the traders, so we built a model to try to understand their role in this system. And so this model is a dynamic simulation model that basically assess the incentives of traders to trade either legal or illegal fishing, depending on lots of factors. And our idea for this model was twofold. Basically, first was to estimate the amount of illegal trade in the system, and then try to understand what could be done about it. So basically, if we know that X amount of the trade is illegal, how can we reduce that? How can we intervene to make this change? So for instance, by improving enforcement or or introducing a price premium, paying a price premium to traders for the legal products, etc. And we apply this in the same system in Chile. And let me show you a little bit about the model. So this is, I guess, a snapshot of the model. It has 4 main components: harvesters, which are the ones that harvest the fish from the sea. Then you have traders, which buy the fish from the harvesters, and these traders move the fish to the end markets, which again buy the fish from the trader. And these traders are enforced along the way between the harvesters and the end market. And this equation here, it's sort of the heart of the model, I guess. It's a profit maximization function, which tries to maximize profit, obviously, by changing the amount of legal and illegal units that the trader takes. So basically, the trader has limited space in the truck, and the trader has to decide whether to take 80% illegal and 20 legal, or 50-50, or 80% legal and 20 legal. And obviously, this decision will change depending on the price, depending on the level of enforcement. So basically, we wanted to put all of this together and try to understand it with a model. This was published like a few weeks ago. I can also share the reference, and I'm happy to provide more details of the model at the end if people have questions, but I'm just gonna, because of the time, gonna jump into some of the results. And so here's the sort of the first part of results from the model. In blue, you see the legal landings mean. This is the data that we had from the government. So we only had legal data. So this is the landings across the year. So this is depending on the week of the year. And in green, you see the results we got from the model, which are quite close to the mean of the landings in this fishery. But more interestingly, we found that the level of illegal trading was really, really high, and way higher than the legal landings, which we knew already that it was a lot, but we didn't know by how much, and we didn't know how this changed throughout the year. So for instance, here you can see that at the end of the year, it falls and the legal landings go up. So this was, again, sort of a snapshot of what was happening in the fishery, but we also wanted to understand what can we do about it. And so to try to understand how to intervene for improving the sustainability of the fishery, we run the model thousands and thousands of times and randomly increase the value of parameters of the model that were proxy for policy levers. So for instance, we increase the price premium that traders get at the end market, we increase the price elasticity or the efficiency of enforcement. And what this graph shows is basically how much you could improve the situation considering 3 goals. So for instance, of course, if you reduce the illegality, you're going to reduce the amounts of units being traded, which are the ecological and social goal, but the fishers are losing money because their catch value decreases because they are fishing less. So basically this graph shows you the space in which you could operate by intervening, but it also shows you that it's quite impossible to optimize in the 3 directions, of course, and I guess this sort of puts feet on the ground and say, well, if you get to reduce illegality, this is the other sort of consequences you get: positive consequences in terms of the ecological role, but negative consequences in terms of money for fishers. And we also wanted to understand, well, by how much we will have to increase, for instance, enforcement or price premium to get to this point, and actually to get to reductions over 30%, sort of substantial reduction in illegality, you would have to increase these parameters by more than 200%. So basically this means that enforcement will have to more than double the enforcement just to reduce the illegality by 30% or less, which was quite disencouraging to get that result. I guess I was expecting that it was going to be a bit easier to reduce illegality. So let me just finish by a few points of conclusions. I guess it comes without saying that non-compliance in fisheries is a very complex problem, not only because you have a diversity of motivations. I mean, people and fishers might comply with rules for economic reasons, but as we showed, they might also comply not with rules because they think that the laws and regulations are unfair. And usually those type of things are never considered when analyzing non-compliance. And the other complexity, I guess, has to do with supply chains and actually trying to consider the system and markets as a whole rather than just fishers. And I really think that more attention is required to the market and the supply chain in trying to understand non-compliance and fisheries. It's obviously much more fun to go and work on the coast, but sometimes I think we will have to go to markets, which might not be as fun, but I think it could be quite important for reducing non-compliance. And in my case study, the main conclusions is that non-compliance dominates the market by a lot, and it won't be easy to solve. It is possible to solve. It is possible to improve the situation, but it is not easy to do so because you will have to improve enforcement, for instance, by a lot to get some reduction in illegality. And I guess just to finish is to highlight the need to not only think about rules when managing fisheries and trying to sustain fisheries, but also like the impact of those rules in those that are going to be operating there. What's going to be their incentives? Because if you keep incentivizing illegal trade over legal trade, that's what's going to happen. And not most, but lots of the rules that we use to manage fisheries actually incentivize illegality because it becomes quite expensive to fish legally. And so I think it's something we have to think through when managing fisheries is how we incentivize legal over illegal trade. And also the need and the and the urgency in a way to really unpack what motivates compliance, because we tend to think it's just an economic or a monetary issue, but there's so much more in there in the social norms that fishing communities have. And if we don't consider those when intervening, I think it could backfire quite easily. And just to finish, two things or directions where I think the research about non-compliance could go or should go is trying to understand the balance between technical, by technical I mean technology, enforcement, things like that, and non-technical fixes like improving the governance, participatory process. There are cases and fisheries where technical fixes are going to be best. There are other where non-technicals are going to be better, and there's other where there's a mix. And I think we have to find ways to really understand what would work best in which cases and actually try to apply those and test them. And the other conclusion, and I think that in this fishery, the problem of non-compliance is so established and has been there for so long, is such a norm that it's really hard to change it. But I think that the key for sustaining fisheries is trying to prevent, trying to monitor, trying to measure these type of things, not when the problem is huge, but when the problem is starting, in order to be able to stop or to reduce the problem before it gets huge. So yeah, thank you very much. Just want to finish by thanking the key informants and fishers that participated in these studies, the Marine Stewardship Council and Becas Chile for financial support and the research assistants. I guess I'm going to stop sharing the screen to see if you have any questions, but I'm happy to come back to the screen if you want to see a slide, or I have more method slides extra if you want to have a look as well.
So if you have any questions, I think you can unmute yourself and go ahead to us, Rodrigo.
I have one. Hi, Rodrigo. Really nice talk.
Thank you.
I was thinking about why fishers are complying with the other 3 rules, but not the quotas. Do you think they don't feel that the quotas are a legitimate number, or they don't recognize that as a valid decision that they don't intervene? What do you think it's, or it's really that they are really small, really low, and they cannot comply because they need to do their livings? What do you think?
No, that's a good question. I think it's a mix. The quotas are indeed low, and fishers don't really like the quota system because it gives most of the quota to the industrial fleet and not the artisanal fleet. And fishers also think that the overall quota is really low and the scientists are not getting the stock assessment right. That's on one side. But with the other regulations, fishers participate in one way or another in setting all the other regulations. So they were consulted, they participated, or in the case of this 3-day rule, they actually made that rule. And so there's much more peer enforcement. Like no one goes more than 3 days a week because everyone else is watching. You know, with the quota, they don't care. It became a norm. It became a norm that it was fine to fish over the quota. But with the other rules, they are looking to each other, and no one is gonna go with a really small mesh size or fishing during the ban because they believe in those rules and they believe those rules are legitimate, and that doesn't happen with the quota. And so it's again, it's a mix of not being happy with the regulations and the regulation being quite sort of low quota means that you cannot make a living with it. So it's a mix of both.
If no one speaks, yes, I was just wondering about that you just mentioned, the fact that they are more involved in the definition of the other regulations, but not the quota, and if it would be useful to have a more participatory decision on these quotas. So they would understand better why they are defined like this, how scientists are calculating this or that, and then to distribute with more equity.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm writing in the discussion on my thesis that I'm finishing. It's exactly that, and I think that, as you said, if you get them involved, they would understand way better why is those numbers. But the other way around, I think scientists might also get a chance to learn where the stock might distribute, because today scientists go to the same places every day to do the surveys, and fishers move around everywhere to look for the fish. So they might actually give quite good inputs to the researchers as well. So I think there's a channel of communication that today by law is closed. No one can talk with this scientist. It's a committee that is completely closed and hermetic. And so, as you said, a participation will improve the legitimacy of the regulation and make fishers more willing to comply with it, for sure.
I'd like to add something if possible. Yep. So thank you, Rodrigo. I enjoyed your presentation, and this is a topic I've been thinking and writing for some time. The parts of legitimacy are pretty familiar to me from both here in Portugal and in other countries. While you were presenting your model, I had the feeling that most of your emphasis was on the complexity of the market, and you closed the harvesting component as something really easy to manipulate. But then you mentioned that you have an industrial component as well. And when I look to my small scale fisheries, the majority is a continuum between the people you considered for the legal fishers and other sources of provision of the same species, be it more illegal, be it completely legal or even recreational, that are supplying to the same market. So the moment you start introducing variable levels of input from different levels of non-compliance, all this gets even messier than you already had, isn't it?
Yeah, no, for sure. You have to cut the complexity at some point, right? But in this case in particular, it's funny because most of the non-compliance happens with the legal fishers. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to understand where it is. It's in a specific copes in a specific region. And with the industrial fleet, well, it's hard to say, but most people think that the levels of illegality, at least for this fishery, is quite low. There isn't much illegality by the industrial fleets because they have to pay an external certifier to certify
MSC.
the landings.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a bit of corruption here and there, and they pay an extra bit but people that have been working on this thing, that there isn't much illegality. So we know quite well how much they add to the market. And so, yeah, I mean, there's obviously in-betweens. This is not white and black, but it's slightly more control in this case than others, where you have more of a continuum in the vessels as well. You don't have like you have small, medium, large, very large. In this fishery, it's actually 3 industrial vessels, and most of the small-scale vessels are quite the same, are 16 meters or
and you don't have recreational contributing to the catch. Okay, no. So it's a simple case in a way.
Yeah, that's why I chose it.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
So is there no subsidizing these fisheries, since they seem to be catching so much and going over the quota? Does that mean they're solely relying on the catch for their living?
Yeah, lots of these fishers only do this fishery. There are some that fish other fisheries, but the one that has been a good backup is the squid, that is quite seasonal in this part of the country. It's the jumbo squid. So basically it comes and goes. It was here for years and people fish a lot of it. And then it left the waters of Chile. And so now the people are back into fishing hake mostly. But yeah, most of these people rely heavily on the fishery.
Yeah, hi. I really like your presentation, Rodrigo. Thank you very much. I just want to add, like in Peru, we have the same case, like not the same, but very alike. I think one thing is very important for fishermen to actually go for like the minimum sizes is to really understand how they are made, because they always ask, like, can you raise a little bit, like a few centimeters, like the minimum catch, and it's not that easy, right? So I think what Barbara, I think, was saying, like, it's very important to actually maybe have workshops or how to or explain to them how is these minimum sizes are made, so in order to them to comply for that rule, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think in Peru, except for a few fisheries, there's even less communication between scientists than in Chile with fishers.
Yes.
I've worked quite a bit in Peru as well. And it's terrible. I mean, investing that little time of bringing the rules down to whoever's gonna abide by those rules is key. Otherwise, people just don't believe it and they don't follow it, and then you have a problem.
Yeah, and also I think that the industrial fisheries, well, at least in Peru, are not actually following the rules very well. So the artisanal fishermen obviously said, like, if they are not following the rules and they catch so much than us, why we should follow the rules, right? So that's another thing, like I think measurements and rules have to be like for everyone as well, because otherwise nobody's going to follow.
Yeah, no, sure. And in Peru, I think it's also quite common that the industrials get to the first or second mile, which is illegal for them.
Yes.
And so they see it. They see it all the time. They see
Exactly.
these big ships coming into their waters and fishing everything. And so it's even worse if you can see it from your house.
Totally. Yes.
So,
well, thank you.
oh, thanks for the question.
Final minutes to ask any more questions for Rodrigo. Go ahead. Okay, I guess the questions are done. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. It was a very interesting seminar, and we really appreciate you joining us. And I wish you the best in your work and then your defense. And next week for everyone in CCMAR, or if you want to join, we have another seminar. It's a bit different this time. It's called Liquid Biopsies for Lung Cancer Detection using blood platelets from Mafalda Fiera. And so thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you all have a good week.
Ciao, bye. Thank you very much for
Bye.
the invite and the questions.
Thank you.